Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Seeing the Forest for the Trees, Developing a Common Operational Picture. This will be presented by Kip Holdridge and Michael Weber. And before I do their bios, I want you to know that after we saw their title, we decided we needed to have an award for the catchiest title. Jen and I both really enjoyed Seeing the Forest for the Trees. Kip Holdridge is an emergency management professional with over 15 years of experience in emergency operations centers, emergency communications, disaster response, community recovery, and continuity of operations. Kip recently transitioned to federal service after supporting the DOE Headquarters Consolidated Emergency Operations Center as a contractor for the past 5 years. He has also supported FEMA, DOD, USDA, HUD, and the White House Military Office through countless exercises and real-world events, from national special security events to wildfires and river flooding to Deepwater Horizon and Superstorm Sandy. Michael Weber is the operations lead for the DOE NNSA Emergency Operations Center and a contractor at Mellie Associates, where he has worked for the past 5 years. Michael has previously worked as a contractor at DHS in emergency management, science and technology, and critical infrastructure related roles. He has a master's degree in national security from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C., and a bachelor's degree in history from Michigan State University. Please remember, put your questions and answers in the chat so that the presenters will answer those after their presentation. And we will have plenty of time for questions. But before we go on, I just want to thank again Kip and Michael for the time they've put into this presentation and all of you who are joining us. I'll now turn the virtual stage over to Kip and Michael.
Welcome, everyone, to today's session entitled Seeing the Forest for the Trees, Developing a Common Operating Picture. My name is Kip Holdridge, and I'm the current Operations Program Manager in the DOE and NNSA Headquarters Consolidated Emergency Operations Center. I'm joined today by Mr. Michael Weber, who is a Watch Operations Analyst in our Watch Office. We will be sharing with you some basic considerations and best practices for creating a common operating picture, as well as sharing our vision for a true enterprise-wide COP in the future. This is our agenda for today's session. We will walk through the basics of what a COP is, identifying information sources, crafting the displays, and sharing some best practices. We will finish up by talking about our vision for the future. I would now like to pass the mic over to Michael to begin the discussion of what is a COP.
What is a common operating picture? Many organizations in both the federal government and the private sector produce some sort of COP, although some organizations may use a different term. For organizations with an emergency management or disaster assistance mission, some sort of COP is an essential tool. The FEMA National Response Framework provides a great baseline definition for reference. Keywords to focus on are communication, information, management, and sharing. In short, a COP is an integrated picture of an incident or is the operational posture of an organization. Core concepts of a COP are all related to information and include timeliness of information, accuracy of information, comprehensiveness of information, operational and actionable information, and collaboration, in our case, among DOE and NNSA sites and labs, program offices, and the Watch Office. All of these elements are essential. A COP can take several different forms depending on the needs of the customers. There is no one-size-fits-all as long as the core concepts are incorporated. Some organizations may develop a common operating picture for a specific incident. Other organizations may maintain a COP as part of their steady state, ready at all times to be referenced by decision makers and consumers. For organizations with a high operating tempo, a live COP, continuously updated, may be the most appropriate. For other organizations with a slower tempo, a point-in-time COP might suit the needs of the organization better. DOE Order 151.Delta refers to a common operating picture, so we thought it was worth mentioning here. Order 151 refers to a COP more in the sense of a tool to provide situational awareness products, for example, situation reports from a specific incident. NA44's vision is more of a steady state, comprehensive picture of what is going on across all facets of DOE and NNSA. A variety of companies today offer tools and software to help an organization customize its COP. Systems such as WebEOC, eMINS, Esri storyboards can build customized platforms displaying information on maps and dashboards, often in near real time. Nest and ESF12 deployments and DOE site statuses are just a few examples. Products from Microsoft and Cisco offer tools to help teams collaborate literally anywhere in the country or the world, inputting information that can be fed into the COP. With all of these technology options out there, it's easy to get caught up with the whiz and the bang many companies offer in their demos. But it's important to keep in mind that it's the information that is the most important piece of the puzzle. Without information, there is no COP. For organizations that don't have a budget to support a technology solution for their COP, simpler tools like PowerPoint or even whiteboards can also be effective tools depending on your organizational culture. The COP is only as good as the inputs feeding into it is the bottom line. This first chart represents the current or normal flow of information at DOE and NNSA. Although there are formal reporting relationships, much information flows through informal relationships. The result is inconsistent information delivery. A well-designed COP can bring order to the chaos. The COP can help reinforce formal reporting relationships and decrease the informal ones. The result is a clear, comprehensive, and consolidated information flow to senior leadership that will support their best decision-making. We wanted to show you a few examples of what a common operating picture might look like both in the public sector and private sector. The first example is FEMA's COP. At any given time, FEMA has a lot of different things going on, and their COP helps them manage and track that information at both the strategic and tactical level. They have teams deployed or returning from providing disaster assistance whose status they track here. They also track the number of individuals deployed and team readiness to deploy status. These metrics are important for FEMA leaders making informed decisions about current and potential upcoming disasters, which might require FEMA resources and teams to deploy. The Pacific Disaster Center is a good example of an open source COP. This is a free service, but there is a paid option with more features. Many people like the look and feel of examples like this. It's interactive, tells a story, provides a geographical reference, is updated in real time, and provides context for each event mapped. PDC shows a global picture, so it's pretty busy. For most organizations, it might in fact be too busy. One thing you don't want to do with a COP is to overload the consumer, creating a high noise to signal ratio, which could distract users from the most important information you want to convey. Critical information requirements are an important part of the thought process going into your COP. We have several important considerations. What does your leadership need to know? This is the raison d'etre for any COP. Also important to consider is what do the consumers want to know? This can be tricky to manage because sometimes senior leaders may want information that isn't important for that incident. Does the information support decision making? Balancing the signal to noise ratio is important here. Timeliness. When and how often do the consumers need the information? The answer to that question will inform whether the COP is static or live. What information do you want your program to share? As emergency managers, your input into the COP is important. Your insight and perspective about what information is important for senior leaders to know provides senior leaders information they may not know that they need until they see it, and it provides continuity during leadership transitions. The customization of how the information is organized and laid out should also be very much based on consumer preference. For customers with a limited amount of time or more interested in the strategic rather than the tactical, pictures and short bullets may work best. For consumers interested in details, a longer narrative or tools to allow them to dig into the graphs and charts may be the best option. It is important to carefully consider each piece of information that goes into your COP, as well as how it is presented. Consumers have limited time and capacity to process the information, so you want to make sure that it is value add. The blue column on the right lists some types of information, depending on your organization, that may be useful as a baseline to include in your COP. The source of information and how that information is updated and populated within the COP are important considerations. Manual updating of a COP is very resource intensive and time consuming. There's also a greater chance of error and misinterpreting of information. The advantage of automating the updating of the information is your COP includes improved efficiency and ensuring the information is the most current and also reliable. If you use a technology solution to host your common operating picture, one important consideration is how the information is updated and the frequency. Some sources of information may push updates to your COP as they are available in real time. You may also set your COP to pull updates from all sources at a regular interval, for example, once every hour. There are many parts of an organization internally that may contribute information to a COP, as well as external sources who provide information. As an example, most organizations who have weather as an input for their COP will be pulling their information from NOAA. If your COP tracks asset deployments or site statuses, that information would come from sources within the organization. In some cases, it may be important to clearly denote whether the source of the information is internal or external. It's important to keep in mind that both the source and type of information going into the COP may alter how widely distributed you want your COP to be. In the federal government, if the information is classified, that may drastically change your audience. For private companies, issues related to proprietary information may need to be considered. How and where you host your COP may also be affected by the sensitivity of the information you place in your COP. The number of places you get information from has proliferated exponentially, posing a problem. How do you know the source of your information is valid? How do you judge the credibility of the sources of information you collect for your COP? In general, treat information from open source and news media with healthy skepticism until it can be validated by multiple sources. Create a list of organizations and sources with a good track record of providing credible information.
Once you have the basic informational elements and their sources identified, it's time to begin crafting the informational displays, what most people actually think of as the COP. One consideration is customizing your COP for the audience. For example, there may be a basic version for leadership and general population consumption, with a more detailed version for use within the EOC. You can also create dashboards or sub-COP displays specific to different purposes. For example, you might have different data elements to display during steady state versus an operational emergency versus a continuity event. By breaking out these special use cases into dashboards, it relieves the need to try to fit everything into a single display. No matter what format or medium being utilized for the COP display, space will always be at a premium. This is why use of graphic elements and saying as much as possible through colors and formatting is so important. One of the most common graphic elements in a COP is maps. Particularly in emergency management, there's often a geographic aspect to the information being presented. A map is an easy way to highlight geographic information, as well as potential threats, including weather, natural hazards, and more. Another common graphic element is the stoplight chart, where the status of a data point is depicted as green, yellow, or red. This approach is very intuitive, as we are all familiar with traffic lights and the meaning of each color. Although you will need to define parameters for each color, the viewer will instinctively differentiate between all is well versus there's a problem here versus capital PROBLEM. You can also utilize other formatting tricks, from color coding to bold fonts to outline boxes, to highlight changes in information. Another consideration is the use of dynamic content. This could take several forms, but usually require use of an online platform. At the basic level, information in an online platform can automatically update the display as the information changes. On a more complex level, entire elements of your COP display could change or swap out based on what is happening. For example, a map normally covering a large area could zoom in on a specific location when an incident occurs. Another option is having the entire data points being displayed change based on the type of incident occurring. Here, we have an example of the Headquarters Consolidated Emergency Operations Center's COP concept. This is just a notional concept at the moment, but it is something we are working to build in WebEOC. This primary display view is meant for steady-state operations and highlights the status of advisory conditions and DOE assets, as well as the operational status of DOE and NNSA sites. The same information is also overlaid on a national map, which can also be configured to display current and forecasted weather. The EOC's battle rhythm for the day scrolls across the bottom, and buttons in the lower left allow the user to access additional information on dashboards. One of these buttons is for a continuity dashboard, which we'll explore on the next slide. This dashboard concept is intended for use only during continuity events and contains data elements specific to a continuity event. These include the status of personnel accountability, PNF operations, DOE and NNSA site operations and reporting, and location tracking for secretarial successors. The vision is that this dashboard would only be activated during a continuity event or exercise and unavailable for general viewers at other times. And this is another example of an incident-driven dashboard concept, this time for a DOE or NNSA site. The dashboard shows a map of the site and can overlay weather and other threat information on one side, and displays a running timeline of the incident on the other side. The end goal is to have the information in this dashboard inputted either by the Headquarters Watch Office or the EOC operations floor, or even directly by the site themselves. Now that we've covered the basics of building a COP, it's time for some best practices. The first is to make your content relevant to your audience. This entails knowing not only who they are, but what they want to know. What is important to them? If your COP does not serve your audience's needs, then it is not successful. The COP should be value-added and facilitate situational awareness and decision-making. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and the same holds true for your COP. Whether pictures in the traditional sense or more graphic elements, use visuals to communicate your message. This will save precious space on the COP, as well as engage the audience. However, it is important to be aware of the limitations of these approaches. For example, although stoplight charts are ubiquitous in government, they can challenge individuals who are colorblind. This does not necessarily mean that stoplight charts are not useful. It just means that you have to be careful in their deployment and ensure that the colors possess different tones in addition to different hues, so that colorblind individuals can see the differences in the statuses. Branching out and including partners in your COP is a great idea, but be cognizant of the additional workload or burden that this creates for others. Great partnerships develop when burdens are minimized and everyone gets back as much or more than what they put in. And automate as much of the COP as possible. If you're using an online platform, link it to other enterprise information systems. This speeds the availability of information and eliminates human error in manual data entry. Beware that you will need to address and balance cybersecurity concerns, which may ultimately mean that some sensitive systems cannot be linked. And now I'll turn it back over to Michael for the remaining best practices.
For information in your common operating picture which is not live or updated frequently, using a date and timestamp will provide context for the consumers important to their decision making. Be ready to request an update for outdated information if that piece of information is considered as part of a senior leader decision. Ensure the consumers know how frequently you update your COP. As the operational tempo changes, you may need to adjust the frequency to ensure the latest information is being incorporated and available to the consumers. If the updated information is not available, make sure you manage the expectations of your audience and update the information as soon as it becomes available. If available and used by your organization, include reference tables or other documentation to help senior leaders understand how the operational tempo and needs of your organization may change based on the incident or major piece of information being reported in the COP. Examples include the continuity of government, security condition, UCS activation level, or site status. Seek feedback from your consumers regularly on the content and format of the COP. As leadership changes, the format and types of information may need to adjust to suit their preferences. Customer surveys a few times per year and after a significant leadership change should be sufficient. NA44 has developed a concept we call the Brief Me button we hope to include as part of the DOE NNSA COP in the future. The idea is that a senior leader who has a question about information in the COP, wants more context, or wants to know if the information is the latest available, can press a button or click a link which prompts a request for briefing or clarification of information. Now I'll turn it over to Kip for the remainder of the presentation.
As some of you may be aware, the Headquarters Consolidated Emergency Operations Center has a vision for a DOE Enterprise-Wide Cop. This COP would leverage our current use of WebEOC to enhance incident information sharing and facilitate a department-level COP. Where possible, we would connect to existing systems, including WebEOC systems and other critical information management systems already in place at many sites. As we demonstrated earlier, the COP would have a standard steady-state configuration with numerous dashboard views for specific purposes, including continuity events and operational emergencies. The COP would also provide the entire department with a common view of deployed emergency response assets and location tracking of successors. In response to COVID-19, NNSA created the Enterprise Enduring Organizational Improvement Initiative to identify and prioritize areas for improvement exposed by the COVID response. The initial working group identified the lack of an enterprise-wide COP as a complicating factor in the COVID response. This led to a team of personnel from NA40, NA80, NA1.3, NAIM, CNS, LANL, and N2S2 being assembled to dive deeper into the issue and develop a plan of action. This was one of 12 action plans and initiatives proposed to the NNSA Operations and Efficiency Board. The board validated the needs statement for the COP project, but ultimately selected just a few high-level projects on which to focus. However, the COP initiative was transferred from the board to NA40 to continue maturing the project plan and champion development of an enterprise-wide COP. Today, we have shared with you some of our conceptual designs for the COP, but there are a number of technical challenges that must be solved before such a COP can be implemented. We are currently working with IT partners to identify the best solutions going forward, but the overall project remains in the early stages. Stepping back momentarily to look at our conceptual designs, you can begin to see how a DOE enterprise-wide COP would facilitate shared situational awareness, information sharing, and leadership decision-making. Taking the example of an operational emergency at a DOE or NNSA site, leadership would be able to quickly identify an ongoing incident at a site on the steady-state COP, and then click to open a dashboard that drills down for more detailed information regarding the incident. This really creates a new realm of possibilities for sharing information and facilitating decision support that are more efficient than traditional situation reporting mechanisms. We are very excited for what the future holds for emergency management response in DOE. With that, we'd like to thank you for joining us today to talk about COPS. We'll turn things back over to our moderator for questions and answers, but before we do, if you think of any questions later on, or if you're interested in helping us develop the enterprise-wide COP concept further, please send us an email at currentops@doe.gov. And with that, we welcome your questions.
Thank you, Kip and Michael, for that presentation. I'd like to start our Q&A with the first question that came in from Jillian Const out here in Albuquerque at Sandia. She asked, would this DOE COP in WebEOC allow interaction from sites? And there's a follow-up to that. Would DOE be willing to report and share the boards with sites to implement consistent COP concepts at their sites?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And first thing I want to reiterate is a lot of the concepts that we showed in the presentation are still in that conceptual stage and haven't been fully built out. That said, anything that we do have built out to date, we're more than happy to share. So if you are a current user of WebEOC and you're interested in some of the boards that we've built to date, either for the COP or for some of our other purposes, send us an email to that currentops@doe.gov email address, and we'll link back up with you and see what you're interested in, and more than happy to share what we've got.
Thank you, Kip. Michael, did you want to add anything to that, or would you like me to move on?
I would just add, we do have some pretty interesting concepts out there, and so and we would love to collaborate with any site or lab that's interested, because part of developing a COP, we're going to want to know to what the sites need and what their interests are and what ideas they have. So anybody who's interested, we would love to collaborate with them.
Thank you. We had a comment I wanted to read to you. Remember that for 508 compliance, color cannot be the only way that information is conveyed. For example, a stoplight chart, there would also need to be green, yellow, red, or something similar to indicate what is what.
And that's a great point. 508 compliance is incredibly important, and it's something that honestly gets forgotten about with a lot of these online systems, and really needs to be built in on the back end. If you're using a piece of software to do your COP, there's some things that can be done on the back end so that those type of indicators only show up for screen readers and not for folks that are viewing the actual display. But if you're doing it more old school, if you've got PowerPoint slides and things of that sort, then you definitely need to be more blunt in some of your 508 compliance measures. It's an excellent point.
Okay. Another question that Jillian had as a follow-up was, what was this federal or contractor involvement in the COP project?
So a mix of both. So at the planning stage, it's a mix of federal and contractors doing the planning at the headquarters Emergency Operations Center. And then a lot of the development was done by contracting out through Jivari, who's the company that makes WebEOC. And so we partnered with them to do a lot of the development, and actually did a little bit of development in-house ourselves for some of the boards that we use, for some of the boards that some of our different response assets use as well. We have been able to do some limited in-house development, but a lot of that was contracted out for other folks to do.
Wow, lots of interest in this. You're getting lots of kudos. Congratulations, great presentation, it says. Jillian says, thanks. She's going to be emailing you. Andrea McFarland, this is going to be an incredible tool. Great job, guys. Another question that's come in, what are the cybersecurity concerns with a modern COP?
So there's fairly significant concerns if you're using a modern piece of software, especially if you've been paying attention to the news for the past year and a half. Cybersecurity is a big deal right now. And the more you link your COP with other systems and the more sensitive your information is. So if your information is OUO or if it's UCNI, that just creates even more cybersecurity concerns. And so it's a balance that you have to meet between what is the mission requirement and what do you need in order to facilitate that, and balancing that with cybersecurity concerns. And there's different ways you can go about that. You can balance what you need. In some cases, you may be able to obtain a similar or close to the same end goal using a different system than a system you had originally looked at. Take, for example, if you were, say, wanted to integrate your COP with an HR database and a time card system so that you knew who was supposed to be in the building in case the fire alarm goes off. Well, there's a lot of sensitivities with those kinds of systems, of course, largely because they contain all kinds of information that you don't really need for that purpose. But one option could be, well, if you could integrate with the building's card reader system, that could get you the information you need without all the extra concerns of the HR database. And really, in that case, you have true live data of who actually badged into the building and has not badged out. So you have true ground truth on who was in that building when the fire alarm went off. So in some cases, it's looking for other avenues where you can get similar, sometimes maybe even better information with less cybersecurity risk. But the best way to go about it overall is to get the cybersecurity folks involved early on. Don't let them be the proverbial roadblock at the end. Get them involved on the front and help you build towards the solution. And they'll help you balance out all of those concerns and risk and whatnot to get to success.
Great answer. Michael, do you have anything to add to that, or do you feel it was covered well?
No, I think Kip covered that one pretty well.
All right. There is another question that came in. At first, I thought it was a typo, but I think I'm going to read it just like it's written in there. It says, how does ORPS reporting factor in this vision on DOE headquarter COPS? You need me to read that one again, guys, or?
Yeah, Brenna, sorry. Can you read that one more time?
You bet. How does ORPS reporting factor in the vision on DOE headquarter COPS?
So I think in terms of Orbs reporting, it depends on what kind of time frame you're looking for in the COP, because a lot of the Orbs reports are time delayed. They're submitted into the system, sometimes several days after an incident. And so it depends on if the information is still valuable at that point or not, or whether you're looking for more of a live COP of what's going on right at the moment. In which case, that time delay may not be as useful.
One thing I would add for Orbs reports too is it depends on what type of information we're wanting to report. Orbs reports contain sometimes information about someone falling off a ladder or other types of injuries, and so you got to really kind of think about what you really is that type of information something you would want in your COP, and so you'd have to really dig into that.
Okay, there's a couple more and we still have time, so if you all are okay, I'm going to keep reading. How do I convince leadership to provide the resources necessary for a COP?
We'll take this one. The best approach in what we found is simply asking leadership what they want in the COP. That's probably the best approach in where you'll develop you'll be able to develop the best COP is just by asking what do you find interesting, so tailoring it to the senior leaders. Also think about what they generally ask about if you get indirect feedback and include that in your COP if you see a trend. But the first thing that normally leadership asks after an incident is something about the safety of personnel and accountability. So that's something you would want to consider. And when you're designing your COP, you're going to want to, at a minimum, answer questions about personal accountability, operational status of the sites or labs, the location of an incident, especially as it relates to large population centers, and also protective actions that may need to be taken. So you want to consider all of those. And you'll also want to have your COP somehow involved in exercises as well, so you can learn and adjust after each exercise and incident when you do after action reports.
Excellent. So another one is, how would you address classified information in a COPS?
Okay, so there's a couple of basic approaches you could take if you want to include classified information in a COP. The first is to just straight out host your COP on a classified platform, because then it's not really a concern anymore. You have all the safeguards in place to protect that information. Now, of course, there's some pretty serious implications that go along with that. It's really restricts integration with other systems, and it really restricts your ability to share the COP, because you now have to protect the entire COP, at the classification of that system. So there's a lot of trade-offs in that approach. Another approach is to have essentially two versions of your COP, have an unclassified version and a classified version. The implication there is that at some point, you have to figure out how to transition from one to the other, or you end up essentially running two COPs in parallel. And this can end up being tricky because, if you remember, the whole point of the COP is to consolidate into one single source of information, and now you have two. But this can be mitigated with the right kind of briefer. So, for example, if you have the capability to display both of your unclassified and classified COP on screens next to each other in your EOC, the briefer with the right kind of skills can work between those two fairly seamlessly and explain and provide the whole picture for the audience or for any leadership that's come into the EOC for a briefing. And kind of the third basic approach is sort of a tear line approach. So if for example, you're tracking, let's say, a dozen information elements in your COP, and you're doing stoplight charts, but that if half of them become red, now that is classified information. One approach is to design your system so that rather than getting to that trip line and all of a sudden now having a security violation, you do a tear line where your COP essentially shuts down. So, if you have a dozen elements and all of a sudden 5 of them turn red, all of a sudden, your COP either shuts down or all those elements just gray out and you stop reporting. Then that way you don't risk displaying the classified information. And then that can also be a cue to your audience. If you train them that, when certain elements of the COP go dark or go gray, that really that's code for, something really bad has happened and you need to physically come to the EOC and get a briefing. At headquarters, we're taking that middle approach. We've got two COPs. The focus is definitely on the unclassified version. The classified version is much smaller, much less capable. But it's there if we need it, and then we balance the two in the cases where we need to work in that manner.
Thank you. We have a question from John Richards, and we have about 7 minutes left. So he asked, could you discuss the differences in the COPS needs of the Watch Office and CEOC, if there are any?
My mute button there got stuck. All right, so that's a good question. In the short term, we don't see a lot of difference, and what I mean by that is we've designed the COP really for steady state. So it assumes that it's the bright sunny day, and that its purpose is to illustrate things that are now going awry and bring attention to that. However, given that, once the EOC activates, then there's a different set of information requirements. And even if not completely different, at least to a different level. Now they want to dive much deeper. So that's where the concept of dashboards that we discussed can come into play, where you have your COPs set up on the high level really for that steady state. And then you can design different dashboards for different purposes. For example, one could be, at our headquarters example, we could have a dashboard for a site emergency that really dives in deeper on information that would be specific to a site emergency. And we can display all that information. So that's a good way to balance the needs of your various organizations, is using some of those dashboard concepts, or really even wholly different COP displays, because if you're using a piece of software, it's all just data in a database, and it's just a matter of how you mix that information together and display it, so you can remix your data for different audiences and for really however many audiences that you think you may have. The only downside is that you have to think of that ahead of time so that it's in place. But then if you have an incident where you learned, hey, it would have been nice if we had a dashboard that dove deeper into this issue, that becomes your lesson learned and your after action, and you go out and build that dashboard.
Thank you so much. This apparently is a very interesting topic for a lot of people. Please remember that if you have any other questions, Kip and Michael's emails are in the speakers box on our annual meeting page. And I want to thank Kip and Michael both for their expertise and their time in sharing this. If you did want to rewatch this or share it with someone else, it'll be ready in anywhere from 12 to 24 hours for a playback. And please don't forget to fill out your survey. And for those of you that are able to stay with us, we have a fun social hour planned. We're going to be doing a scavenger hunt. There's only 10 items on it. They should be items that you can find within your home, especially since we've all been home for the last 18 months. So again, thank you, Kip and Michael, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.